Thanks for tuning into the For Those Made to Do podcast. We are your hosts, Mandy, Sahota,
and Bianca, Pavel. This podcast is all about the doers who have achieved career success in the UAE and the stories that go with it.
Hello, and welcome back to our bonus episode of For Those Meant to Do Corporate Finance. We are here with Stephen George, Associate Director of Deloitte Middle East, and we are going to pick up again with the Wildcard Question. In our first episode, we discussed that ESGs are core topics for business education. In your opinion, how much should sustainability weigh when private or public entities make spending decisions in the space of defence, security and nuclear power?
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great question. The short answer is yes, they definitely should weigh. I suppose the longer answer is it's quite tricky to work out exactly how much they should weigh. So in the particular projects that I have experience in, a lot of this is about how do we build something that is, first of all, quite large, but also safe and secure, and often includes a lot of concrete and things like that. So when you're thinking about that, obviously that has an environmental impact, and there is unavoidable environmental impact. So I think the way I would try to bring ESG into corporate finance as applied to those infrastructure type projects is at the business case stage or the kind of strategy stage at the very outset of the project. Are there any design or technical decisions we can make which reduce that sustainability cost? Now, part of that business case will probably be, okay, yeah, we can make a roof out of solar panels, but it costs an extra $1 billion. So is that something we want to do or not? But at least you're kind of prompting the question and considering the question. And then as you go through the project and you start a construction phase or an operation phase, challenging yourself as the owner of the asset or the operator of the asset to think about how we can do things differently to reduce our impact. And ideally, I think this is maybe slightly more geeky than your listeners are interested in, but as the owner of an infrastructure asset, I would like to see those owners increasingly include ESG requirements in contracts. So I would, if I owned, a bridge or whatever, I would quite like to see the operator of that bridge constantly, every year come back to me with, this is how we think we can reduce our impact, or this is how we think we can reduce our impact, but you're going to have to pay us an extra $1 million a year. Are you happy with that? Or, some of these will pay for themselves, but I think going through that kind of thought process is where these projects need to get to.
Do you feel like you have a responsibility to kind of drop it in when having these kind of high level conversations? Or is it like very tricky because then that's your personal kind of viewpoint and then you're treading very, very delicately, aren't you?
Yeah, it definitely can be tricky. So this would be an area where there is a difference between the UK and the Middle East as well, from my experience, where, as I said in the main episode, when I was advising government in the UK, I would be speaking to civil servants and, whether it's their organisation or their individual politics, they would jump at the suggestion that we should think about ESG. And that's probably less the case here, to be honest. That being said, it's still completely valid to bring it up as a consideration, as a component of a decision-making framework. Yeah. It's not going to be the defining decision point, but it should be a component. Yeah. That is tricky though, to be honest.
I can imagine it to be.
Yeah. And I'm just thinking from the perspective of the UAE, which is just about to host COP28 in December, where everybody will be talking about sustainability and how every industry can become more sustainable. I'm just trying to understand if in practice, and I know you've only been here for a year, but do you feel like clients, both private and public, are starting to create more awareness and are starting to be more aware of their own impact? And are ESGs becoming more and more important in these conversations as a trend?
I would say yes. It definitely varies from client to client and market to market as well. I think within the GCC, the UAE is probably the most mature in terms of considering these issues. And that's why you see COP28 coming here. But yeah, it definitely does. I think the problem that we need to resolve is, if you take NEOM, for example, which is the mega project in Saudi in the northwest, their ambition is to be completely environmentally sustainable once the build is complete. The technology doesn't quite exist yet to see that is deliverable now. Now, that's not saying it won't be deliverable in a few years, but that just makes the decision making quite difficult, because you're getting a project underway and you kind of have to solve for environmental impact as you go. But it's a really positive thing that's the ambition. It's just a really difficult aspect of these projects,
especially when assessing risk when the technology isn't there yet. I can imagine that's a very hard job to do.
And the rate of change with these things is massive. So even if you don't know at the start of a project, by the time you make a decision on a project, maybe you do know a few of those things and you can reduce the risk around those. But yeah, it's really complex. And I think as long as ESG is a consideration, that's a real step forward from where we were, a few years ago. But it's difficult.
The wildcard question is an interesting one because we expect a wild answer, and it's almost no repercussions, no strings attached. So this is just our imagination. So I'm going to challenge you on that. Let's say for your next project, for the next airport that's being built, you have unlimited budget. Let's say your client in Saudi comes and says you have 10 billion dirhams to develop this. In that instance, how much of that budget would you allocate to ESG as a percentage of the total budget?
This is a very difficult question to answer. I would say if there is genuinely no budget, then you should build the most sustainable asset that is possible to build currently. And that will be, again, the current technology will be a constraint on that. So it probably still will have an impact. That is what you should do. I don't think a project like that is going to come very soon, to be honest.
Yeah. I mean, it's important to understand what the reality of sustainability is right now, because we need to stay realistic. And we talked about this in the first episode with our dean, and she did make the point of, we expect most businesses or all businesses to all of a sudden be sustainable and have all of these sustainable practices. But is that going to ensure that they still remain in business? Because changing their practices very quickly can be very, very costly. So not everybody can afford to get there. Yeah. So it's important to know where we are. It's also good to picture the future, because again, we have to have that vision of what a sustainable world would look like in order to get there, and then convince the main stakeholders to put us on a path to get there. So this is why we've been asking you this question, to try and get a sense of, if everything was possible, what would you do? For me, I think, obviously I don't do finance, but I'm just going to go and say maybe 30% of my budget, if I had unlimited budget to build an airport, would go into sustainability. Would I use concrete? As little as possible. I know it's very affordable, but it's also one of the biggest polluters, right? So I would try to use sustainable materials, and where I can't, I would try to offset the carbon footprint, in other ways. So just with that thinking in mind, because we want to basically build the next generations of students and business students in particular, with that consciousness of sustainability at the core of business.
I agree with the sentiment completely. I would like to ideally say that every decision, within a big project, you'll have, thousands of decisions. Every decision should consider sustainability. Yeah. If there is a choice that has a limited or reasonable cost, but materially changes the sustainability, improves the sustainability, then that is a choice that should be made. When you kind of take all those decisions and you build it up into the overall project, then hopefully you've made a real difference. It's just really, really hard to try and put a number on what that would be.
And that's okay. And that's why it's called the Wildcard.
So we're going to have to figure it out. So this only means that we have some work to do, right? All of us collectively. Maybe some of these answers will come in December from COP28, when a lot of people are getting together to try and solve these problems. If they don't, then it's the next big thing for all of us to think about and try to solve. But we really appreciate your perspective, and also how grounded you are in reality, because that's very important to understand where we are right now, so we know where we have to go from here.
Thank you.
All right, that's a wrap. Is there anything you would like to mention to our listeners that we haven't covered already?
Yeah, so I suppose I would just finish with, if any of this has resonated with you and you think you might enjoy doing something a bit like I'm doing, then please take a look at the Deloitte Careers website, where you can hopefully find everything you need to start a really interesting and rewarding career.
Amazing. Thank you, Stephen. It's
Very
been
welcome.
really cool.
Thank you so much for your time.
You're very welcome.